Hello and welcome to Introduction to Maya 2016. Autodesk Maya is an industry-leading 3D animation software with a comprehensive package. Maya was originally developed by Alias Wavefront and currently owned and developed by Autodesk. With Maya, we can create animation film, games, and breathtaking visual effects. If you can imagine something, you can create it in Maya. Maya's worked it to make it as a final animation film. This course is designed for the absolute beginners who just want to learn the world's best 3D software from scratch. At the end of this course, you will be able to create a simple cartoony scene with a couple of mountains and trees. Now let's begin the course. Hello and welcome to Introduction to Maya 2016. Autodesk Maya is an industry-leading 3D animation software with a comprehensive package. Maya was originally developed by Alias Wavefront and currently owned and developed by Autodesk. With Maya, we can create animation film, games, and breathtaking visual effects. If you can imagine something, you can create it in Maya. Maya's workflow goes like this. First, we create a model, then we texture it, we light up the scene, and render it to make it as a final animation film. This course is designed for the absolute beginners who just want to learn the world's best 3D software from scratch. At the end of this course, you will be able to create a simple cartoony scene with a couple of mountains and trees. Now let's begin the course. This is a 2-hour long course. If you want to watch the entire course from the beginning, you can just continue watching. Or if you want to pick up certain sections, you can check the description. I have added the time code for each of those locations. You can navigate to those time codes, or you can also check the individual video links in the description. The user interface of Maya. Up top, we have menu bar. Now, unlike all the other softwares, Maya's menu bar is slightly different in two ways. Number one, it cannot show all the menu items at the same time because there are a lot of menus. So what we have is we have menu sets. The first 7 menus are going to be common and same at all times. That is File, Edit, Create, Select, Modify, Display, and Windows, and also the last Help menu. And all the other menus will change depending on what kind of work we are doing. Currently, we have selected modeling as the kind of work that we are doing so that we will find all the modeling related menu bars. If I change this to rigging, it will show me menus that are related to rigging. If I change to animation, it will show me menus that are related to animation, and so on and so forth. The second thing is, if I open a menu, I can not only access the content inside, I can also tear this menu off. So if I want to use, let's say for example, I want to use combine feature so many times, every time instead of going to the menu and choosing it, I can just tear this menu and keep it to the side. So instead of just going to the menu and choosing an option, we can simply click directly from here. We can also do it for a sub menu, for example, so that if I want to do an union operation, every time I don't have to go to mesh and then choose Boolean and then choose union. Instead, I can just simply click here. Now notice that even if I close the mesh menu, the Booleans menu still stays there. We can do this for any number of menu bars. So if I want to have a lot of menu bars floating, I can also do that. And I can also do it for any submenus. Let's go through all the other user interface elements one by one. Let's go to Display, UI Elements, and here are all the user interface elements. We can either enable them or disable them. I'll just tear off this menu so that we can talk about one by one. I can also choose hide all UI elements, that means all the UI elements disappear, or show all of them. I'm going to hide all of them and then we'll talk about one by one. First, we have status line. So status line basically has some status information. So for example, it shows us which kind of menu set we have selected, which basically tells us what kind of work we are doing. We also have some quick access buttons like save, open, and new. We have undo and redo buttons. We have some rendering buttons here. And apart from that, we have some status information here that shows which mode we are in. So for example, this is an object mode and this is a component mode. Don't get too much confused. When we get into the other videos, you will better understand what each of those status will do. Next to the status line, we have shelf. Now we can compare Maya's shelf to a regular bookshelf where we will have different rows which has got different kinds of books in each of the rows. So here we have different tabs, just like different rows of shelf, and each of those tabs will have their corresponding tools. So for example, here we have curves and surfaces, so we will have all kinds of curves and surfaces tools like creating sphere, creating cube, and so on and so forth. And if I go inside polygons, I will have all the polygon primitives and some polygon modeling tools. If I get into sculpting, it has got the sculpting tools, rigging, and so on and so forth. Now we can also create our custom shelf just by going to a certain menu item. Let's say if I want to add the set key to my custom shelf, all I have to do is press Control and Shift and click on it so that that menu item is being added here. I can also do that for any other menu set I want. So for example, this time I can go to playback, press Shift and Control and click on it so that you can see that that gets added here. If you want to remove a shelf item, all you have to do is right click on it and choose delete. So that will remove that shelf item. Next to shelf, we have our time slider. Time slider is basically the heart of animation. So if we want to create animation, we will need the time slider, which actually shows these numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. This is just the number of frames. So if you want to create an animation for 1 second, then we will have to have keyframes for 24 frames. If you want to control how many frames you want to show in your timeline, that's when we use the range slider. So that is the next UI element. So if I click on that, this shows us the range slider from which we can choose what should be the range of my time slider. So now it shows starting from 1 frame till 120 frames. So that's what we have here. So if I want to increase the number of frames here, all I have to do is just click here and drag so that you can see that now we have more number of frames. So I can push it all the way to 200. So now we have frames from 1 till 200. I can also enter a manual value here. Let's say I want to have from frame number 50 till frame number 150. So now you can see that the range that we have selected is 50 frames till 150 frames, so that you will find that same range here in our timeline. So that is from 50 to 150. And we also have some playback controls here, like for playing in reverse, going to the next keyframe, previous keyframe, next frame, previous frame, go to the end and go to the beginning, and so on and so forth. We also have some animation layers, character sets, and things like that. When we get into animation part, we'll talk more in detail. Next to our range slider, we have command line. Command line helps us to enter or input manual commands. We can enter commands in either Mel or in Python. Just for demonstration, if I just type in sphere with Mel and I press enter, it basically creates a NURBS sphere. The right side of the command line is for showing results. So if it is a positive result, or maybe there's an error message or something like that, it would show the last one line of that here, so that if you want to check if there's an error in your file or something like that, then it would show up here. Next to the command line, we have helpline. Helpline is basically a single line which is non-editable, and it just shows us some information related to the kind of work that we are doing. So for example, by default, it shows us which tool I have selected, and it just gives us small information saying that select an object. So that's just the thing that we can do with the help of the selection tool. And depending on where I am on my screen, it will also give us information. If I click on this, it's going to toggle the attribute editor on or off. If I move here, it shows me that I can toggle tool settings on and off, and so on and so forth. So it basically gives us some information, and depending on what kind of work we are doing, the information would change. So next is toolbox. The toolbox is divided into two areas. The upper area has got the tools, and the lower area has got some viewport layouts. So we have the selection tool, we have laser selection tool, we have a paint selection tool, move tool, rotate tool, and scale tool. So depending on what kind of action we're doing, we can choose the kind of tool that we want. And this area shows different kinds of layouts for our viewport. So by default it shows us a single view, which is perspective for us, and we can also choose a 4-view. We can choose a view layout with a perspective and the outliner. So we'll talk about these things more when we get into other videos. So next to toolbox, we have attribute editor. Attribute editor basically looks empty right now because we don't have any objects in our scene. So let me quickly create a simple primitive just to show some content. So attribute editor basically shows all the attributes that are connected to that particular object. So we can change all kinds of properties that are connected to this object. Let me hide attribute editor. I'll show you the tool settings. Tool settings contents changes depending on what kind of tool we are using. So if you have a move tool, then it'll show you different options. If you have rotate tool, it'll show you different options, and if you have scale tool, it just changes depending on what kind of tool we are using. We can change all those settings and so on and so forth. Next to tool settings, we have our channel box and layer editor. Now this basically has two things. One is our channel box up here and our layer editor down here. So I'll just push this layer editor down to see our channel box bigger. Now channel box basically has all the animatable attributes of the object that we have selected. So what do I mean by that? Attribute editor has got every single attribute of that object, and channel box has got only the animatable attributes of that object. So any attribute that you see in the channel box can be animated. Attribute editor will have more, including the ones that we have in our channel box. So from attribute editor, you can still animate some of most of them, but whatever attribute you're seeing in the channel box, you can animate all of them. Now below the channel box, we have our layer editor. We've got three kinds of layer editors. One is for display layers, the other one is for render layers, and for animation layers. So for example, if you have a scenery where you've got a lot of background elements like mountains and clouds and stuff, you can put all of them into one layer. And if you have a river or small trees that are in one place, you can put all of them into a separate layer so that we can hide them and show them, which makes the process of working with our scene more easier. I hope this gives you a little understanding of the user interface elements of Maya, and when we get into other videos, you will better understand how to use all these things into your project. Now that we have understood the user interface of Maya, let's look at the viewports. Now, before start working, I like to keep the viewport the biggest size possible so that we can easily work on it, especially when you have a smaller monitor. So what I can do is I can hide this shelf and a couple of other things here which I will not be using right now. So I'll just go ahead and right click here and choose shelf so that that hides the shelf. And I'm not going to create any animation, so I don't need the time slider and the range slider. I can also go to display, choose UI elements, and I can also click on range slider and time slider. So this gives us the biggest size possible. Now I have just loaded up a simple file so that we can just work on it. Now to work on a 3D viewport, we need to use a combination of both keyboard and mouse. So it is always the best idea to keep your left hand on the keyboard and the right hand on the mouse. Now if I press Alt key and left mouse button and drag in the viewport, I will be able to orbit the camera. So that means like I can see the different views or different sides of my character. If I use my Alt key and right mouse button, I can zoom in and zoom out. If I use Alt and middle mouse button, I will be able to pan left, right, up, or down. Now this is very useful, especially when you're zoomed in too much closer and you want to see the eye of the character, for example. All we have to do is press Alt key, click with middle mouse button, and move to the right so that I can see the eyes. Say for example, if I want to see the nose, all I have to do is press Alt key, use middle mouse button, click and drag. So I can just press Alt key and right mouse button again to zoom out to the full. Now let's say for example you've zoomed in too much or you've zoomed out too much and you want to see all your objects in the scene. All you have to do is press the keyboard shortcut A. Now apart from this perspective viewport, we also have other orthographic viewports. If I press spacebar in my keyboard, it will reveal the other viewports that we have. So we have side view, we have front view, and we have top view. Now if I want to make any of these viewports to be bigger in size, all I have to do is move the mouse on top of that viewport and press spacebar. Now let's talk about two other shortcut keys that we will be mostly using while we're working with our viewport. One is a shortcut key F to frame a selected object. The other one is A, which is to frame all the objects in our scene. Let's say for example I want to work closely on this eye, and the eye is a separate object. All I have to do is select the eye and press F. So what it'll do is it'll make only the selected object to be optimal viewable size in the viewport. If I want to see all the objects in my scene, all I have to do is press A. So pressing A will frame the entire scene. If I press F, it will frame only the selected object. Let's see how this works in the multiple views. So if I press and release spacebar, I will get the other three viewports. As you can see that in the top view, the object is pretty small, and in the other views, it's zoomed in too much. If I want to frame the object in all the different views, all I have to do is press Shift and A. As you can see that now the cat looks in full size in all the other views. Now these viewports are also called panes. I can also change and modify the layout of these panes inside Maya. If I go to the left side, we've got all these different types of layouts. And right at the bottom, we have an option to change the layout. If I just right click here, I can choose a single pane or two panes side by side or two panes stacked up or in any other way we want. So if I choose single pane, as you can see that whatever the selected view, it becomes full screen. If I right click again, and this time I can choose two panes side by side. So we've got the perspective and the side view. If I choose right click here again and choose split top and bottom. So we've got in the top two and then in the bottom just one. We can also choose one of these presets from here. So if I click on this one, for example, we've got perspective view and the outliner. And depending on what kind of work we are doing, we can change to any other panels we want just by going to panels and choosing panel here, and we can choose any of these other objects like the UV texture editor or tracks editor if you're working on animation, or the visor if you want to bring in some paint effects, or the hypershade if you're working on your texturing. All you have to do is select on that so that that pane will be filled with the panel that we wanted to open. You can also adjust the layout, or you can take a completely new different preset. So that concludes this video on Maya's viewport. Maya is a node-based software, which means that whenever we are doing an operation, what Maya is essentially doing is creating a node and connecting it to the existing model. In its most basic form, a node is nothing but a box, and the box will have both input and output connections. So we can have n number of input connections and n number of output connections. And these connections basically makes up the entire work. Let's look at a sample Maya node. I'm going to create a simple sphere. I'll go to Create menu, choose Polygon Primitives, and create sphere. Once I created the sphere, you can visually see a sphere on our scene. But behind the scenes, what actually happened is Maya has created two nodes. One is a transform node and the other one is a shape node. To see these nodes, we have to go to a place called Hypergraph. We can find Hypergraph by going to Windows and Hypergraph. There are two ways we can see the Hypergraph. One is through hierarchy and the other one is through connections. Let's go through the connections. So here you can actually see these boxes. Now these boxes are the nodes. So up here we have our transform node. As you can see, it says P sphere 1. And next to that is our shape node, which is P sphere shape 1. And then we have a polysphere 1, which is basically the creation node. And this is the shading network or shading node. This will basically provide the color. Now, transform node is responsible for telling Maya where this object is with respect to the grid. And shape node decides what is the shape of it. That means like how the wireframe or how the outer area should look like. In this case, it's a sphere. And this is the input node or input connection that actually explains the process of creation of this sphere. Now, depending on which one we have selected, it also changes the content in our channel box. Let me just drag this layers down. Now, if I select my transform node, it just gives us the same name, that is psphere 1, and it tells us the translate, rotate, and scale values. If I select my shape node, it actually gives us the shape node's information, which basically has the input connection. As you can see, the input connection goes directly to the shape node. And if I select this input connection, it's basically telling us the values that it used to create the sphere. So with the radius value of 1, subdivision axis to be 20, and subdivision height to be 20. And this is connected to our shading group, which basically provides the material or the color or how the outside surface should look like. Now, if I remove the history information of the sphere, for example, it will just delete all the input connections that goes to that. So if I just select the sphere, go to edit, delete by type history, it's going to remove the input connections that the P sphere had. And if I select here also, I can see that there is no input connections whatsoever. And I can also disconnect this initial shading group by selecting this arrow and pressing the delete key. As you can see, now there is no material connected to that, and so if I render this out, I will not get anything. To undo that process, we can simply middle mouse click and drag back on here and choose default so that it gets connected back and we get the material again. For most of the part, you will not realize that you're working on a node-based software because these activities are actually happening behind the scenes and these are being taken care by Maya. All you have to do is just focus on your work right in the viewport. But let's say, for example, if you want to become a professional and you want to troubleshoot a lot of things, find out what's actually happening in a node-based level, then you will have to understand nodes and you will have to understand how to manipulate the nodes in our hypergraph. Before we create our objects, we have to understand Maya project. By default, Maya has a project in My Documents. Let's see where it is. We can go to File and choose Project Window. And this would show us the default location of the current project, which is actually inside My Documents, Maya, and Projects. So let's go ahead and check this folder. If I go to my computer, access to Documents, Maya, Projects, Default. So this is the Maya's default project. Now, if you like to keep it here, you can keep it here. If you like to work on the same project, you can do that. You can save all your Maya files, which will be saved inside your scenes folder, and your textures or pictures that you're going to use will be saved inside the source images folder, and any images that you render out will be saved inside images folder, and the play blast small videos, tiny videos that you create will be saved inside your movies folder, and so on and so forth. But I strongly recommend that you create a project for yourself in a different location other than My Documents. I always prefer to create my Maya project inside my D drive. So if I go to my D drive, I currently have just two folders. One is a backup and the other one is a desktop. I'm going to create my Maya project in this location. For creating a new project, we can go to File, Project window, and up here we have to click New. So now we can give a new name for our project. So I'm going to call this My Maya Project. I'm going to navigate the location to my D drive. So I'll go to my computer, D drive, and I'm going to say select. So inside my D drive, I'm going to have a Maya project by the name My Maya Project. And these are the different folders that Maya will be creating inside this project folder. So for my scenes, it's going to be saved inside scenes. And then we have a lot of other things like images, source images, and so on and so forth. So once we set all these folders, let's hit accept. Now let's go to our folder and see what has happened. If I go back to my D drive, you can see that there's a new folder by the name My Maya Project. So if I double click on that, you can see that we have all these folders created by Maya for us. And if I check my scenes folder, for example, it's empty right now because there's no scenes. Let's minimize this. And if I go to open file, for example, it would automatically navigate to my scenes folder inside the current project that I have set. Great. And if I save a file also, it will go back to the same location, which is wonderful. This is how we can set Maya project so that from now on, whatever kind of work that we are going to do will be saved inside our Maya project. Now keep in mind, if you're taking your files to a different computer, you will have to set the project to the location of your Maya project in order for the Maya file to automatically pick up your textures and other files that are connected to this Maya file. To do that, we can go to File and choose Set Project and choose your project name and hit Set. This is just a one-time process that you have to do if you're working in the same computer. If you're taking your files to another computer, every time you change your computer, you will have to set project. And this concludes the video on Maya projects. While working in Maya, there's always a possibility that Maya can crash at any point of time depending on the kind of work that we are doing. For example, if you're working on a very heavy file that Maya could not handle, then it would crash. In order to protect our Maya file and the hard work that we are doing, we can do three things. Number one is autosave feature. We can access the autosave feature by going to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and navigating to Files and Projects. So inside this we will find autosave. First we have to enable it, and then we can set the interval. So for example, if I put 10 here, that means every 10 minutes Maya will create a new autosave file. We can also limit the number of autosaves by enabling the limit autosaves. By turning it on, we can say how many autosaves we want to save. Because if you keep it ticked off, what will happen is it will just keep on creating Maya files every 10 minutes, which will be a huge number of Maya files in our autosave folder, which is not something that we want. So we can enable limit autosaves so that we can have 10 autosaves. So when the 11th one is created, it's going to remove the first one, and when the 12th one is created, it's going to remove the second one, and so on and so forth, so that we will always have the last 10 files. Once we have set the autosave feature, we can go to undo. This is the second step that we have to do. By default, Maya has enabled undo, and it is given a finite number of undos. This is because if I make it infinite, what will happen is we will be able to access way back from the beginning of the opening of the file. But the more number of undos you have, all these information has to be saved in the RAM, which will make the system heavy. So it's always recommended to give a finite number of undos. If you have a really powerful computer, then maybe you can go for infinite. But make sure that it is not turned off. If it is off, then you will not be able to undo any of your work in progress. So let's make sure that it is on, and it's finite, and it is 50. Let's go ahead and hit save. Now the third thing to keep in mind while saving a Maya project is the file extension. So if I go to File and Save, it gives me a chance to save my Maya file in two different file formats. One is Maya ASCII and the other one is Maya binary. Maya binary gives us the Maya file in a machine language, which is not readable through English language. But Maya ASCII will actually give us the entire file in English language where we can modify the codes. The main advantage of using Maya ASCII is the file will be backward compatible. What that means is, like, even if you have created your file in a latest version of Maya, you will still be able to open it in an older version of Maya. So make sure that you enable the autosave feature, make sure that your undo is enabled, and make sure that you save your file in Maya ASCII format. So this concludes this video on saving Maya files. In this video, we'll talk about Hotbox and marking menus. Now, Hotbox can be accessed by pressing and holding the space bar. Now, Hotbox gives us all the menu items that we have up here, including the ones that are hidden. So the advantages, for example, if I'm working on animation, I've got all the menu items for animation. If I want to access a particular modeling tool, for example, if I want to combine a two mesh, what I have to do is I'll have to go here and choose modeling and then go to mesh and then choose combine. Instead, by using the hotbox, what we can do is, just being in animation itself, I can simply press spacebar and go to mesh and choose my combine tool. So this is a nice little way to make your work faster. Next, we'll talk about marking menus. Marking menus appears from nowhere. For example, if I click on this Maya button, it will show us some extra menus. These are called the marking menus. Now these marking menus are also context sensitive, which means depending on where you're clicking, it would give you different options. Notice that this whole time I'm holding my space bar. If you release the space bar, the hotbox will disappear. So make sure that you hold on to the space bar in order for this hotbox to be visible for a long time. Now I can click on this Maya button and go to top view. You'll notice that I'm having top view. I can press spacebar again, click in the center, go back to perspective. As I said earlier, marking menus content will change depending on where you're clicking. If I have an empty space, right click, I get just complete tool and select all options. If I have an object, let's say I have a cube, if I right click on top of that cube, we get the components, that is the vertex, edge, and face. And we have a lot of other stuff. If I right click with shift key, I get more editing tools that are related to that surface. So here, for example, I have editing tools related to polygon. If I press Control and right click, I get more tools like conversion of a selection to edges or vertices or UVs. So depending on the combination that you're using and depending on where you're clicking, you'll get different options. So these are two different ways to make workflow faster. As we work through, you will understand better where to use what kind of marking menus. That concludes this video on Hotbox and marking menus. In this video, we'll talk about wireframe and shaded mode. If you're having an older version of Maya, when you're creating an object, it is not going to look like this. It would look more like this. This is called a wireframe mode, and this is called a shaded mode. Now to switch between wireframe and shaded mode, we can press the shortcut keys 4 and 5. If I press 4, it'll go to wireframe mode. If I press 5, it'll come back to our shaded mode. Now these are just two different ways of seeing our scene. We can also show the wireframe on top of the shaded mode by going to shading and choosing wireframe on shaded. Especially while we're working with modeling, it'll be useful for you to show the wireframe on top of the shaded mode in order to better understand how our edge flow is. Switching between wireframe and shaded mode is simple as pressing 4 and 5. So this concludes this video on wireframe and shading mode. In Maya, we can create two kinds of surfaces. One is called NURBS and the other one is called polygons. We can create both of them by going to Create menu and choosing either NURBS primitives or Polygon primitives. Let's look at NURBS first. I'll tear this apart. I'll tear this off so that we can look at these primitives. I'm going to start with plane because plane is the basic shape of a NURBS. Now, to understand NURBS, any NURBS surface is based on the simple plane. So how can we get a cylinder from the simple plane? All we have to do is bend this surface and make sure that this end is coming up here and touching this end. We will actually have a cylinder. Let me explain that with the cylinder itself. I'm going to create a cylinder. I'll make it bigger a bit. I'll rotate it. Don't worry about this rotation and making bigger tools. We will be explaining it in the next video. So let's put it like that. I'll give an exact value of 90 degrees. If I look at these sides, we've got a lot of these lines. These lines are called isoperms. And you will notice that this one single isoperm is thicker compared to the others. That is because this is the area where two isoperms, that is this end and this end, is meeting. Let me go ahead and open this up by going to this input area and reducing this end sweep value. You can see that it's actually detaching from there and opening up. If I continue to open up, now you will notice that yes, it is indeed a simple plane that is being bent to create this shape. Okay, so cylinder is easy to understand. What about cone? Cone also is made up of a simple plane. As you can see, here is our connecting area. And this connecting area is called seam. So we've got all these isoperms and we have seam. So if I just go back here and adjust the sweep, as you can see, again we have the same thing. So here in cone we have the cylindrical shape, and then the top area is being bent or squeezed to a 0 point to make this cone. Let's look at sphere. Sphere is also made up of a simple plane. And you can see that by adjusting the end sweep. And for sphere, it is being squeezed in the top and squeezed in the bottom. Let's look at a cube. Wow, this cannot be made from planes, right? Yes, it is. But it's not just one single plane, it's multiple planes. So if I select in the top, we have one plane here, we have one plane here, and we have another plane here. So it's basically made up of 6 different planes. Now here's the tricky one, the torus. How could we make a torus from a single plane? Well, basically it involves 2 different directions of bending. So first we will have it bending this way, and then we have another one that goes minor sweep, yes. Now you can see that yes, it is indeed a simple plane which is being bent in 2 directions in order to form the complete torus. Now let's talk about polygon primitives. If I go to Create menu, Polygon Primitives, we can access all the polygon primitives here. Let me create a cube. In this course, we're going to be focusing more on polygons. So let's talk about each of those components that makes up a polygon object. I've created a cube, and I'm going to zoom in closer. I can press the shortcut key F. And you can see that this is a simple cube, and it's made up of a lot of sub-objects or components. What are these components? The smallest component is called a vertex. If I right click and hold on any object, it will reveal the components that we have inside that. So we have vertex, we have edge, and we have face. Let's look at vertex first. If I choose vertex, it will show us these small dots in every corner. These are called the vertex. Now here's a term that you have to understand. If we're talking about a single vertex, we call it vertex. If there's multiple, then we call them vertices. So you have to understand when I say vertices, that means I'm talking about more than one vertex. If I'm just saying vertex, that means it is just one single vertex. If I connect two vertices, I will end up with a line that is called an edge. So if I right click and choose edge, that's this one. I can say this is also a vertex. This is also an edge. This is also an edge. This is also an edge, and so on and so forth. If I connect four edges, that is 1, 2, 3, and 4, I will end up with a plane. This plane is called a face. So if I right click here, I can access my face and click on that so that I can select my face. Now these vertex, edge, and face, these three elements contribute to creation of a polygon. Now these faces are also generally called polygons because sometimes they might have more than 4 edges. But it's optimal to have 4 edges. It'll be easy for you to texture and do all kinds of other stuff. Now let's look at some other primitives. We can create cylinder. We can create cone. We can create torus, pyramid, or any other primitives from here. Now you'll also notice that no matter what object you have selected, you will always find these vertex, edge, and faces. And we can actually manipulate them in order to get whatever design that we want. Now let's create a couple of primitives and see how we can modify their values. I'll create a cylinder. Right here in this input area, I can adjust this radius. Say for example, instead of 1, I can give 2, which makes the radius bigger. I can adjust the height from 2 to 5, for example, which changes the value. Now there's an easier way to change these values also. All I have to do is select this label, come to the viewport, use the middle mouse button, and click and drag from left to right, so that you will notice that the value in the height is actually changing, and we can visually see that in the viewport. I can also do this for any other attribute. I can go to radius, and you can see that I can adjust the radius directly like that by pressing with middle mouse button and dragging to left and right. I can also increase the subdivision height. That decides how many divisions we want, and the subdivision cap. You can even keep it 0, which gives a clear space there. Let's look at a couple of other primitives. Let's say a sphere. Again, we have radius, which we can adjust, and subdivision axis. The more you have, the smoother it will be. The less you have, the less smooth it will be. Okay, so depending on how much division you want, how smooth you want the surface to look, you can adjust that. Let's create a prism. As you can see, we have side length. We have the number of sides. We can increase as many as we want. And we have subdivision height, we have subdivision cap. That looks like a spider web. Okay, so we can choose the side length and the total length. Okay, so we can create a helix, and then we have subdivision axis. That makes it more and more smooth. Subdivision coil, and we have radius. Let's keep it something like that, small. Okay, good. And I can decide the height, the number of coils. That looks like a nice spring. Okay, fine. So we can just adjust these input values to create the desired primitive that we want. So this concludes the video on creating primitive objects in Maya. In this video, we'll talk about the basic transformations in Maya, which is translate, rotate, and scale, or move, rotate, and scale. For doing these three operations, we can actually use the three tools that we find in our toolbox: move, rotate, and scale. These tools can also be accessed with the help of shortcut keys. So I can simply press W, E, and R to get those three different tools. Let me create an object first. I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and choose Cube. I can choose the Move tool, and I can move the object from one place to another. We can also do this movement with the help of our channel box. If I look in the channel box, I can see translate XYZ, rotate XYZ, and scale XYZ. Scale value is by default 1, and all the others are 0. Now, if I want to move the object in X-axis, all I can do is just click here and move. If I want to move it in Y-axis, I can click here and move. If I want to move in two axes at the same time, I can choose somewhere here in the middle. Say, for example, I'm looking here in the other viewports. This is Z-axis. I don't want the object to move in Z-axis, but I want it to move in the two other axes. All I can do is just click here and move. Notice that in the top view and in the front view, it's actually moving sidewise, but in the side view, it is moving only up and down. That's because we're constrained the movement to only X and Y axis so that it never moves in Z axis. The same way we can also constrain it to Y and Z axis just by selecting here. So you can see that it's moving left and right in side view, it's moving up and down in top view, and it's moving up and down in front view. Okay, fine. If you want to move in all the views, you can just select in the middle and move, so that now you can see that in all the views we're actually seeing a movement in all the axes. And you can also visually see in our channel box that all the three axes are getting the change. Let's go ahead and select all of them and press 0 so that we'll bring it back to the default location. Let's try the rotation tool. So if I choose the rotation tool, now for rotation we also have the same color coding. So we have red, green, and blue, and we also have one big circle outside. So if I want to rotate in X-axis alone, I can just click here and rotate. You can see that the value in X-axis changes. Let me make the object a bit longer so that we can actually see the rotation. So let me just increase the height. Okay, nice. Now let me go back to my rotation tool. So now you can see that I'm rotating in X-axis alone. I can also rotate in Y-axis and Z-axis. Now if I want to rotate an object with a free-form rotation in all the axes, I can click anywhere in the middle. Okay, so now I can actually rotate it in all axes with a free-form rotation. But it is always recommended not to do this, because sometimes we might get disoriented about where our object is and what is the rotation value that we have given for certain axis. If you got stuck at any point of time, you can simply select all these three values and give 0 so that it will come back to the original rotation values. So whenever we are rotating, it is always better to choose the axis that you want and just rotate it to the value that you want. The first one is depth map shadow and the second one is ray traced shadows. Now depth map shadows is created with the help of an image. So if I turn on the depth map shadow, I'll have to give a resolution, which is basically the resolution of the image that it creates. And it will just decide which area